"You're finished, Ethan." The words landed in the boardroom with the cold certainty of a judge's final verdict. A few people looked down at their notes. Most didn't. Most smiled. Some even laughed. And not a single person in that room imagined that less than a year later, the man they were watching fall would become the one competitor their powerful CEO could no longer ignore. The conference room on the 23rd floor of Whitmore Logistics overlooked downtown St. Louis like a glass throne above the city. Late afternoon sunlight reflected off steel towers and riverfront warehouses while executives sat around a polished walnut table worth more than many American families earned in a year. Claire Whitmore stood at the head of that table, confident, composed, and completely in control. At 38, she had built one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the Midwest. Investors admired her. Competitors feared her. Employees followed her without hesitation. Across from her sat Ethan Walker, 42 years old, single father, business owner, and according to every financial report in front of them, a man running out of options. Claire closed a folder and folded her hands. The numbers speak for themselves. Her voice was calm, professional, sharp enough to cut through any hope lingering in the room. Ethan remained silent. "You've lost 3 major contracts in 6 months. Claire glanced toward the investors seated nearby. "Your facilities are outdated. Your debt is growing. Your company is finished." A few executives exchanged knowing looks. One quietly chuckled. Another leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone watching an inevitable ending. Ethan didn't react. He simply looked through the floor-to-ceiling window behind Claire toward the distant industrial district along the Mississippi River. The old warehouses stood beneath the fading sunlight like forgotten giants waiting for history to remember them again. Claire mistook his silence for surrender. "You should sell while there's still something left to save." Ethan finally turned toward her. His expression remained steady. Not angry, not defeated, just tired in the way only someone carrying years of responsibility could be tired. "Maybe," he said quietly. The room relaxed. Investors nodded. Several people began gathering their papers. The meeting was over. The story seemed finished. But stories built on dignity rarely end where people expect. 2 hours later, Ethan drove his aging Ford F-150 through the industrial outskirts of the city. The heater rattled. The dashboard light flickered. The November air carried the smell of rain and rust through small gaps in the window seals. Beside him sat his 10-year-old daughter Lily, finishing her math homework under the glow of a small reading light clipped to her notebook. "Bad meeting?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "I've had worse." Lily studied him for a moment. "Do you believe them?" He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The city lights blurred across the windshield as twilight settled over the river. "No," he said. "Not yet." A few minutes later, they passed an abandoned property hidden behind chain-link fencing and overgrown weeds. The warehouse stretched nearly 300 feet across the lot. Broken windows reflected the last traces of daylight. Its faded brick walls carried decades of storms, failures, and forgotten dreams. Most people saw a ruin. Ethan slowed the truck. His eyes never left the building. Something about it felt different, like a second chance waiting quietly in the dark. And while Claire Whitmore celebrated another victory high above the city skyline, Ethan Walker stared at a collapsing warehouse everyone else had given up on and saw the beginning of something no one was prepared for. The next morning, Ethan Walker returned before sunrise. The warehouse stood exactly as it had the night before, silent beneath a gray Missouri sky. Rust stained the loading docks. Broken glass glittered along the edges of the cracked pavement. A faded sign hung crooked above the main entrance, barely visible beneath decades of dirt and weather. Most people would have driven past without slowing down. Most people had. Ethan stepped out of his truck and locked eyes with the building again. The cold November wind pushed against his jacket as he walked toward the chain-link fence. Lily climbed out behind him, pulling her knit cap lower over her ears. "So this is it?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "This is it." Lily stared at the massive structure. "It looks terrible." Ethan laughed quietly. "That means nobody else wants it." She considered that for a moment. "Is that good?" "Sometimes," he said. "The best opportunities are the ones everybody else ignores." They squeezed through an opening in the damaged fence and crossed the overgrown lot. Weeds poked through broken asphalt. Rainwater collected in shallow depressions. The warehouse itself seemed impossibly large up close. The place had once been a distribution hub serving freight routes across several states. Now it sat abandoned, forgotten by investors, developers, and nearly everyone in the city. Ethan pushed open a rusted side door. The hinges groaned. Dust drifted through narrow beams of morning light. Inside, the space stretched farther than Lily expected. Old shelving units lined the walls. Empty pallets sat stacked in corners. High above them, steel rafters disappeared into shadows. "Wow," Lily whispered. Her voice echoed softly across the enormous room. Ethan walked slowly through the building. Every few feet, he stopped to examine something. Electrical panels, support columns, loading bays, storage areas. He was not looking at what the warehouse had become. He was imagining what it could be. The silence felt different here. Not empty. Waiting. By noon, they sat on overturned crates eating sandwiches they had packed from home. Lily watched her father studying old blueprints he had purchased from the county records office that morning. "Everybody thinks this is a bad idea, right?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Probably. Even Uncle Ryan? Especially Uncle Ryan." Lily laughed. Then her expression softened. "Do you think Miss Whitmore was right?" The question lingered in the cold air between them. Ethan looked toward the broken windows where sunlight filtered through layers of dust. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he shook his head. "No, how do you know?" "Because being finished and feeling finished are not the same thing." Lily nodded slowly. The answer seemed to settle somewhere, deep inside her. Later that afternoon, Ethan met with the property owner. The negotiations lasted less than an hour. By sunset, the paperwork was complete. Every remaining dollar he had managed to save after losing his company was now committed. Friends would call it reckless. Financial advisors would call it foolish. The city would call it desperation. But as Ethan stood alone in the center of the warehouse holding the signed documents, something stirred inside him for the first time in years. Hope. Quiet. Steady. Unshaken. And far above downtown, where success seemed measured by glass towers and quarterly reports, nobody yet realized that the man they had counted out had just made the first move. Winter arrived early that year. By December, the mornings were cold enough to leave a thin layer of frost across the warehouse windows, and every breath Ethan Walker exhaled seemed to hang in the air a little longer than it should. Most days began before sunrise. He would drop Lily off at school, stop for supplies he could barely afford, and spend the rest of the day inside the enormous building that everyone else believed was a lost cause. The work was exhausting. Dust covered every surface. Old equipment had to be removed piece by piece. Leaks in the roof revealed themselves whenever rain rolled through the city. Some evenings his hands ached so badly he struggled to hold a coffee cup. Yet every morning he returned. Lily did too. After school, she often sat on a folding chair near the loading dock, doing homework, while Ethan worked nearby. One evening, she looked up from her notebook and pointed toward a section of wall covered with peeling paint. "What goes there?" she asked. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold air. "I do not know yet." "You bought a warehouse, and you do not know?" He laughed. "I know where I want to go. I just do not know every step yet." Lily smiled. "Mom used to say that." The words settled softly between them. Ethan paused. For a moment, he could almost hear his late wife laughing somewhere inside the silence. "Yes," he said quietly. She did. As the weeks passed, progress came slowly. One repaired loading bay. One clean storage section. One functioning office. Small victories that nobody noticed except the two people working there every day. Around town, however, people noticed something else. They noticed Ethan spending money he did not seem to have. They noticed trucks delivering materials to a building everyone had forgotten. They noticed effort where they expected surrender. At a neighborhood diner one afternoon, an old acquaintance slid into the booth across from him. "You were still working on that place?" the man asked. Ethan nodded. "I am." "Why?" Ethan stirred his coffee. "Because it still has value." The man glanced out the window. "Nobody else sees it." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is exactly why I bought it." Across the city, Claire Whitmore heard the rumors too. During a leadership meeting, one of her managers mentioned Ethan's name. Apparently, he is renovating that old warehouse on River Street. A few people laughed. Another executive shook his head, probably trying to salvage what is left of his pride. Claire barely looked up from her tablet. "It will not matter," she said. The conversation moved on. Yet later that evening, driving home beneath the glow of downtown lights, she found herself thinking about him. Not because she viewed him as competition, Not yet. But because most people accepted defeat when it arrived. Ethan Walker had done something different. He had disappeared into a building everyone else considered worthless. And somehow, for reasons she could not explain, that unsettled her more than failure ever could. By early February, the warehouse looked different. Not impressive, not beautiful, but alive. The broken windows had been replaced. 3 loading docks were operational again. Fresh paint covered walls that had not seen attention in decades. Every improvement had come from careful budgeting, long hours, and a stubborn refusal to quit. Yet the biggest change remained hidden beneath the surface. One Saturday morning, Ethan climbed into a neglected storage section at the far end of the property. Dust covered everything. Old records filled rusted filing cabinets. The smell of aged paper and machine oil lingered in the cold air. He was searching for maintenance documents when he discovered a locked metal cabinet bolted behind a shelving unit. After nearly an hour of work, he managed to open it. Inside sat dozens of engineering plans, freight maps, and transportation records dating back more than 30 years. Ethan spread them across a folding table and studied them late into the evening. Lily sat nearby coloring while he examined every page. Suddenly he stopped. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan stared at one particular blueprint. "I think I found something." The warehouse had once served as the center of a regional freight network that connected rail, truck, and river transport more efficiently than most facilities in the state. The system had been abandoned after corporate mergers decades earlier. Most companies had forgotten it ever existed. But the infrastructure remained. Hidden rail access, specialized loading routes, direct connections that could dramatically reduce shipping times. Ethan's pulse quickened. For months he had been repairing a building. Now he realized he might be rebuilding an advantage. Over the next several weeks, he immersed himself in research. Every evening after Lily went to bed, he sat at a worn kitchen table surrounded by maps, cost estimates, and logistics reports. The coffee grew cold. The hours disappeared. Slowly a vision emerged. Not another transportation company. Something smarter, faster, more efficient. One evening Lily walked into the kitchen rubbing her eyes. "You are still working?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "I think I finally understand what this place is supposed to become." "What?" He looked at the blueprint spread before him. An opportunity nobody else noticed. Across town, another conversation was taking place. A small manufacturing company had recently approached Whitmore Logistics seeking a customized distribution solution. The account was relatively small, not worth much attention. Claire's management team declined the request. "Not enough volume," one executive explained. "Too many special requirements." The client left disappointed. Most people forgot about it immediately. Ethan did not. Through an old industry contact, he learned about the company's situation. Instead of seeing inconvenience, he saw possibility. A chance to prove his model. A chance to test his ideas. A chance to take the first real step forward. One rainy afternoon, he drove to their facility and asked for a meeting. The owner looked skeptical. The company was struggling. Ethan's operation barely existed. Yet for 90 minutes, he listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and outlined a solution tailored specifically to their needs. When the meeting ended, the owner extended his hand. "You really think you can do this?" Ethan shook it firmly. Yes. For the first time since losing everything, the future no longer felt like something he was chasing. It felt like something quietly moving toward him. The contract was small by industry standards. The kind of account large corporations barely noticed. Annual revenue projections were modest. Shipment volume was limited. The margins were thin. Yet when Ethan Walker signed the agreement, he treated it like the most important deal of his life. Because in many ways, it was. The first shipment left the warehouse on a clear March morning. Sunlight spilled across the loading dock as a single truck rolled through the gate carrying products for the manufacturing company that had chosen to trust him. Ethan stood beside the driver with a clipboard in hand. Lily stood nearby holding a cup of hot chocolate almost too large for her small hands. "One truck," she said. Ethan smiled. Every company starts somewhere. Even the big ones. Especially the big ones. She watched the truck disappear down the road. "Then this is a good day." Ethan looked toward the highway. "Yes, it is." What happened next surprised everyone except him. The customized logistics model worked. Delivery times improved. Costs dropped. Customer satisfaction increased. Within weeks, the manufacturer referred him to another client. Then another. Soon the warehouse that had once echoed with emptiness began filling with movement. Forklifts hummed across polished concrete floors. Phones rang inside renovated offices. New employees arrived carrying coffee cups and cautious optimism. Most were people who had struggled to find stable work. Ethan hired them anyway. He remembered what it felt like when someone gave you a second chance. One afternoon, while reviewing operations reports, Ethan noticed a familiar name on a transportation database. Whitmore Logistics. Their network still dominated much of the region. Their revenues dwarfed his. Their facilities were larger. Their resources were greater. Yet for the first time, he was no longer looking up at an impossible mountain. He was standing on his own ground. Across the city, Claire Whitmore sat inside a quarterly performance meeting when one of her senior managers cleared his throat. There is something unusual in the regional numbers. Claire glanced up. What is it? The manager projected a chart onto the conference room screen. A small competitor is capturing niche accounts at a surprisingly fast rate. Another executive frowned. Who? The manager hesitated. Walker Freight Solutions. For a moment, nobody spoke. Claire studied the name. She recognized it immediately. Ethan Walker. The room expected her to laugh. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. How many accounts? 7 new clients in less than 60 days. Revenue. Still small. Growth rate. The manager swallowed. Remarkably high. Claire sat back in silence. The room felt different now. Not tense. Curious. A few months earlier, Ethan had been viewed as a man standing at the edge of collapse. Now his company was appearing in performance reports. Small. Unimportant. Easy to dismiss. Yet something about the numbers bothered her. Growth rarely happened by accident. Especially not in logistics. Later that evening, Claire remained alone in her office, overlooking the city skyline. The lights of downtown shimmered beyond the glass. She opened another report and reviewed the data herself. The patterns were clear. Consistent. Disciplined. Intelligent. She closed the file slowly. For the first time, she was not thinking about the man she had written off. She was thinking about the possibility that she might have underestimated him. And sometimes, in business, that was the most expensive mistake a person could make. Spring transformed the city. Trees along the riverfront filled with new leaves. Construction projects appeared across downtown. Freight traffic increased. Business confidence returned. And with it came something Ethan Walker had not expected so quickly. Competition. What began as a handful of niche accounts was becoming something larger. Every month brought new clients. Every week brought new inquiries. The warehouse that once sat silent now operated from early morning until long after sunset. Trucks moved through loading docks. Dispatch teams coordinated routes. Employees who had once worried about layoffs now discussed expansion. Yet success carried its own challenges. One Tuesday morning, Ethan reviewed a proposal for a regional food distributor seeking a long-term logistics partner. The account was significantly larger than anything his company had handled before. The numbers were promising. The opportunity was real. But there was one detail that made him pause. Whitmore Logistics was bidding on the same contract. Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied the documents. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled. Not because he expected an easy victory. Quite the opposite. For the first time, he was stepping onto the same field as Claire Whitmore. Across town, Claire received the same report. Her executive team gathered around the conference table. Revenue projections glowed on a large screen. Market analyses covered the walls. One vice president adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Walker Freight Solutions has submitted a proposal. Several executives exchanged surprised looks. For this account, one asked. Yes. Another executive laughed quietly. That is ambitious. Claire did not laugh. She continued reading. The room slowly fell silent. What? Asked one manager. Claire placed the proposal on the table. It is good. The room became even quieter. How good? Someone asked. Claire folded her hands. Good enough that we should take it seriously. That answer changed everything. For the first time, Ethan was no longer viewed as an interesting comeback story. He was becoming a legitimate competitor. Industry publications began mentioning his company. Local business journals published articles about innovative regional logistics models. Former colleagues reached out. Former clients called. Some wanted to congratulate him. Others wanted to know how he had done it. Ethan gave the same answer every time. One customer at a time. One promise at a time. One day at a time. Meanwhile, Claire found herself paying closer attention than she intended. Late one evening, she visited an industry database and reviewed operational metrics from companies across the region. Her eyes kept returning to the same name. She examined delivery efficiency, customer retention, growth trends. The numbers revealed discipline, patience, intelligence. None of it looked accidental. Outside her office window, city lights reflected across the Mississippi River like scattered stars. Claire stared at the screen a moment longer before closing the file. Months earlier, she had believed Ethan Walker was finished. Now every report suggested the opposite. Somewhere along the way, the man she once dismissed had become the one competitor she could not ignore. And deep down, a question she could not answer continued to grow louder. If he had been capable of this all along, what else had she failed to see? Summer settled over St. Louis with long golden evenings and humid air rising from the river. Business magazines began calling Ethan Walker one of the most surprising success stories in the region. Investors asked questions. Reporters requested interviews. Competitors watched carefully. Ethan ignored most of it. Every morning, he still arrived before sunrise. Every evening, he still walked the warehouse floor before heading home with Lily. Success had changed his circumstances, but it had not changed his priorities. Claire Whitmore noticed that too. The more she learned about him, the more confused she became. One afternoon, she sat alone in her office reviewing a collection of public records, old articles, and archived business reports. She expected to find evidence of luck. Instead, she found sacrifice. 10 years earlier, Ethan had operated a thriving logistics company. Revenue had been strong. Growth projections had been excellent. Then, almost without warning, everything changed. Claire continued reading. Medical expenses, asset liquidations, loans secured against company property, personal guarantees. One document led to another until a picture slowly emerged. Ethan had not lost his company because he lacked talent. He had dismantled it piece by piece, trying to save his wife during a long battle with cancer. Claire stared at the screen in silence. The office suddenly felt smaller. The city skyline beyond her windows blurred into the background. She opened another article dated several years earlier. A photograph showed Ethan standing beside his wife, Sarah, smiling at a community charity event. They looked happy, ordinary, real. Claire read the accompanying story twice. Then a third time. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. For months, she had viewed Ethan's collapse as a business failure. Now she understood it had been something entirely different. It had been an act of love. Later that evening, Claire attended a charity fundraiser hosted at a downtown hotel. Business leaders filled the ballroom. Conversations flowed between polished tables and crystal chandeliers. During dinner, she found herself seated beside an older banker who happened to know Ethan well. "You worked with Walker years ago, correct?" she asked casually. The banker nodded. "One of the smartest operators I have ever met." Claire glanced toward him. "Then why did everything fall apart?" The banker's expression softened. "Because some people choose people over profits." He took a sip of coffee. "Most executives protect their companies first. Ethan protected his family." Claire said nothing. The ballroom noise seemed to fade around her. "Did he regret it?" she finally asked. The banker smiled gently. "Not once." Driving home that night, Claire found herself taking a different route through the city. Almost without realizing it, she passed near the warehouse district. The building Ethan had purchased stood illuminated beneath security lights. Trucks moved through loading docks. Employees finished late shifts. The place looked alive. Claire slowed briefly at a traffic light and watched from a distance. Months ago, she had seen a defeated man standing at the end of his story. Now she saw something else entirely. A father, a survivor, a builder. And for the first time since their paths had crossed, Claire Whitmore felt something she had not expected. Respect. Autumn arrived with unusual intensity. Freight demand surged across the Midwest. Manufacturing orders increased. Distribution networks stretched to capacity. For companies in the logistics industry, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. And for Ethan Walker, it brought the challenge he had spent months preparing to face. The state announced a massive transportation contract involving multiple counties, dozens of manufacturers, and long-term distribution commitments worth millions of dollars. Winning it would transform any company that secured it. Industry analysts immediately identified two serious contenders: Whitmore Logistics and Walker Freight Solutions. The headlines appeared almost overnight. Business journals called it the most unexpected competition of the year. Reporters requested interviews. Investors watched closely. Inside his warehouse office, Ethan ignored the noise. He focused on spreadsheets, route designs, operational forecasts, and customer needs. The same way he always had. One evening, Lily entered carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "Everybody keeps talking about this contract," she said. Ethan accepted the cup and smiled. "People like competitions. Are you nervous?" He looked through the office window toward the warehouse floor below. Employees moved between workstations. Forklifts transported inventory. Teams coordinated shipments with quiet efficiency. "A little," he admitted. "Good," Lily said. "Mom used to say being nervous means something matters." Ethan laughed softly. "Your mother was usually right." Across the city, Claire Whitmore faced pressure of her own. Investors expected victory. Executives expected victory. Industry experts expected victory. Losing was barely discussed because nobody considered it realistic. Yet Claire had reviewed Ethan's proposal. She had studied his numbers. She understood something many others did not. This competition would not be easy. During a strategy meeting, one executive suggested targeting Ethan's smaller accounts to weaken his position. Another proposed aggressive pricing designed to force him out of contention. Claire listened quietly before shaking her head. "No," the room fell silent. "We win because we are better," she said. "Not because we try to damage someone else." Several executives exchanged surprised looks. Months earlier, she might have agreed with them. Now she could not. Later that week, both companies delivered final presentations before a review committee. Business leaders, transportation officials, and economic advisors filled the conference center ballroom. Ethan arrived carrying a simple briefcase. Claire arrived with an executive team. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. The atmosphere felt electric. Yet something unexpected happened during the presentations. While competitors focused on scale, market share, and projections, Ethan focused on people. He spoke about efficiency. He spoke about innovation. But most importantly, he spoke about service. Communities, small businesses, families depending on reliable deliveries. The room listened carefully. Even Claire found herself listening differently than before. Not as a competitor evaluating weaknesses, as a leader recognizing character. When the presentations ended, nobody knew who would win. Analysts predicted a close decision. Investors debated probabilities. Reporters prepared headlines for either outcome. But as Ethan and Claire crossed paths near the conference exit, they shared a brief glance. No arrogance. No hostility. No bitterness. Only mutual respect. And for the first time since their story began, the real battle was no longer about proving who was stronger. It was about revealing who they truly were. 3 weeks later, the answer arrived. The awards ceremony was held inside a renovated historic theater overlooking the river. Business leaders filled every seat. Reporters lined the aisles. Camera flashes reflected across polished wood and crystal chandeliers. The contract announcement had become one of the most anticipated business stories in the Midwest. Ethan Walker sat quietly near the back beside Lily. He wore the same dark suit he had owned for years. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Lily adjusted the collar of his jacket and smiled. "No matter what happens, I am proud of you." Ethan looked at her and felt something no award could ever replace. "That means more than you know." On the opposite side of the theater, Claire Whitmore sat surrounded by executives and investors. Months earlier, she would have expected this evening to be a formality. Now she understood it was something else entirely. A moment of truth. The lights dimmed. The audience settled into silence. One by one, speakers stepped onto the stage. Economic leaders discussed growth. Industry experts discussed innovation. Then came the final presentation. The announcer approached the podium carrying a sealed envelope. The room seemed to hold its breath. The recipient of this year's Regional Transportation Excellence Contract is, the pause felt endless. Whitmore Logistics. Applause erupted across the theater. Executives stood. Investors cheered. Cameras immediately turned toward Claire. She rose gracefully and walked toward the stage. Ethan applauded respectfully. Lily squeezed his arm. For a brief moment, it appeared the story had ended exactly the way everyone expected. Claire accepted the award and stepped to the microphone. The applause slowly faded. She looked across the audience, then toward Ethan, then back to the crowd. "Thank you," she began. I am honored to accept this recognition. More applause followed. Claire waited patiently until the room became quiet again. But before I continue, there is something I need to say. The audience shifted. Reporters lowered their pens. Even the executives behind her appeared confused. Claire took a slow breath. A year ago, I made a mistake. The room grew still. I looked at someone facing loss and assumed I understood his story. Ethan looked up. Claire met his eyes from across the theater. I believed failure had defined him. The silence deepened. I was wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The man I underestimated built something remarkable from almost nothing. He created jobs. He served customers others ignored. He rebuilt trust one relationship at a time. Most importantly, he demonstrated something our industry needs more of. Character. The theater became completely silent. Claire smiled softly. Ethan Walker, would you please stand? Lily's eyes widened. Ethan hesitated before rising slowly from his seat. Hundreds of people turned toward him. Some recognized him immediately. Others only now understood who he was. Claire continued. Tonight my company received the contract. But this man earned something far more valuable. Respect. For a moment nobody applauded. The silence itself seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened. Then one person stood. Then another. Then another. Within seconds the entire theater rose to its feet. The applause rolled through the room like thunder. Ethan looked down at Lily. Tears glistened in her eyes. He smiled and gently squeezed her hand. The warehouse had never really been about business. It had been about belief. About dignity. About refusing to let pain become the final chapter. And as the audience stood honoring the man they once overlooked, Ethan realized something beautiful. Success was never proving Claire wrong. Success was becoming the man his daughter already believed he was.